Hello everyone, it's Sandra here, and this is a check-in on my Buy the Book bin that I'm running, the micro-infused feeding experiment. What's interesting is from the top down, I can see, I'm just going to lift these cups up one at a time. Here's the control one. Can you see the large piece of carrot kind of sticking up there? It's like that big piece of carrot worked its way to the surface. And in the microbe-infused one, I see a big piece of carrot. I also see worms hanging off the bottom of the microbe one. So I better put the case underneath that one right away, because there are worms in the building. There we go. So let's take a look at these two containers. All right, so first the control, and we have lots of worms in there now. Let me just show you a close-up of those worms that are in our control group. Now remember, this is how most people feed their worms, is, you know, the new bedding and then the food scraps, the grit, new bedding. And we have a nice little group of worms right there on the food. The food is very moist, which remember last time it was not moist. So I am not saying that this is necessarily a better way to feed your worms. There are many times that you may not want worms to eat quickly. For instance, you know, you may not check in on them all that often, and you may not want to process your food, which makes the food go faster, or do these microbe-infused feedings. However, if you have critter problems, Bentley Christie says this is a great way to control against critters because the worms get in first. Okay, so this is our control group, and after 8 days, these worms are into it. If I came into this bin, I would see this little bit of carrot left over, and I would say this bin needs another feeding, right? So that's your typical feeding. 8 days later, this needs another feeding. Let's take a look at the microbe enriched one now. So I'll just turn this over, tap it out. There we go. In the bottom there, you can see it's quite black in there. All right, let's take a look at what's in the microbe enriched feeding area. I'll just get this cup out of the light here. There are worms in the cup, but it doesn't matter now. So the carrot here that was worked way to the top is very bright orange still. You can see the worms taking off for the corners. So at this point, this is very, very moist. I get another mini worm ball in here. At this point, I don't see a lot of difference between the two experiments in terms of the number of worms that are in there. This large piece of carrot was worked its way to the top, and I have a theory about that as the worms process the material, it's just like shaking a bowl when you're making cookie batter or something, the big lumps come to the top. So I think that's why often when you go into your bin, you'll find a label or something like that worked to the top, because I think the castings and everything just shake down below. Now this material, it's really hard for me to demonstrate it anyway, except by telling you this material feels more like castings than this control group. In the control group, I can still see strands of carrot peels. In this group, I'm not seeing big long strands. This one that was stuck on the carrot that came to the top is about the longest piece I can see in there of anything identifiable. So what we've got here is we've got two bins. This is my experiment with the microbes in it, and this is the one without. And I know I'm probably holding them the wrong way. So this is the microbe one that I'm shaking. This is the one without. And so very close in terms of, you know, that large piece of carrot that's left over at the end. Both of them have one large, still orange piece of carrot that was worked its way to the top in each of the bins. This bin, though, has far less visible long strings of carrot peeling that I'm still seeing in this bin. And carrot peels are not a particularly slow food, but they're not a fast food either, I find. Especially these were raw. Of course, they're raw. They've been frozen, but they were raw. So, oh, here's one. Oh, no, that's a worm. I thought it was a carrot peel. So the longest carrot peel, I guess I'm seeing, maybe it's this one here in the other bin, but I'm seeing many long carrot peels in this bin. So I think I can safely say this experiment has proven that worms will get into food after 8 days, whether you put microbes in it or not. The worms are going to find your food. So, and oh, here's another solid piece of carrot in the control bin. So the worms are going to find the food whether you put microbes in them or not. But if you put microbes in them, you're going to get faster processing. The moisture was a lot better, the moisture retention in this group. And the material is less identifiable as carrot peels. And it's more identified. I don't want to say it's more black because, of course, I did put a teaspoon of castings in there. But that is one of the characteristics, is it is a darker in appearance. Okay, so I think I've tortured these worms enough. Now that I've spent a bit more time in both these bins, I do think the experimental bin here has more worms in it. I actually think that bin there that I'm holding up has more worms visible. If I turn this over to show you the worms here, than this bin here. I actually do think, now that I've been in both of them for a few minutes. All right, so these poor worms, I've tortured them enough. I'm going to call this experiment, a conclusive finding that putting microbes in your feeding will speed it up if that's your objective. If you are having critter problems, you may very well want to do something like that. I'm obviously going to have to do something about all these worms in the bottom of these bait cups because I'm not taking them out of this bin. This is my bin that I started with 125 worms, and I need every single worm in here pulling its weight to make sure this bin keeps moving forward. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put these two experiments aside for the moment, and we'll just do a regular check-in on the bin. Let's see if we can see any other worms that are cruising the corners in this bin. I will confess that I put my hands on the bedding a few days ago, and they were drying out. So I gave them a really hefty drink, and so. This bin normally, as you know, dries around the edges, but what I did is I gave them a good solid drink the other day. That may have kept some of the worms in this bedding material and not driven them into the bait cup areas. So this is the avocado pit corner. Let me just take a look. Are we seeing signs of worms? Yeah, we are. Right away, we're seeing signs of worms. Elsewhere in the bin, here's another one, elsewhere in the bin, so there are worms. So that shows you that these bait cups, although they certainly attracted a crowd, they didn't attract all of the worms. So what I'm finding is the moisture in here is actually, it's a lot, it's retaining moisture a lot better. Now I did water it, but you know, these castings are starting to accumulate in greater number. I'm seeing, like when I flip this over, you can actually see the castings along the bottom of the bin here. So that's really nice to see that this bin is finally starting to have better moisture retention properties. It's taken these 125 worms a long time to get to that point. There they are, hard little workers. So that's nice. That's nice that they are working hard, getting this bin to that point that it's not going to dry out so much. And I'll tell you why that's a concern for me is we are going to be leaving my bins alone for the next considerable future, actually. And so I need to give each of my bins, you know, a bit of a going away feeding and tuck them into bed for the night to make sure that they stay safe and sound. You know, probably going to be a couple of weeks at least. And, you know, Anne from Plant Obsessed always says, you know, you don't want to check in on your worms too often. And I have cut back, I promise. When I was brand new at this, I checked in on them far too frequently. But now I usually do once a week, and it's going to be at least 2 weeks. And this bin concerns me because I had to come in and do a midweek watering on this bin. Definitely as I'm getting close to where the bait cups were, you can see a lot of worm activity. Maybe the contrast with the cardboard might not be there, but there's a lot of worms in this area. And so definitely they were around the bedding near the bait cups in greater number than they were in those other corners of the bin. So anyway, I've got to prepare this bin for a bit of a lengthier time without anybody checking in on it. I'm now in the corner where the experimental bin was, and there are a lot more worms where the experimental bin was. I don't know whether you saw that, but a lot more worms all of a sudden right where the microbe infused cup was. So that also shows you that it was seeping out of those holes. So my going away present for these worms is going to be something that will keep them nice and moist. And that is a nice big chunk of watermelon. Now it's only watermelon rind, but nevertheless, it's going to be nice and moist. And you know, if worst case scenario, if the bin dries out around the edges, then the watermelon itself will nevertheless have a lot of puddle right here in the center. So I've also got some grit to go down on this. Should be good. But I want to put a lot of new bedding on top of this. Note, I am not putting any microbes on top of that watermelon because it needs to go. It needs to last like a good 2.5 weeks. So I don't want it to speed up and be gone in a week. Not that the worms would suffer over 2.5 weeks, not at all. But I want them to take their time. And actually, I'm actually hoping that we'll see a bit of a crowd when we come back after 2.5 weeks. All right, with these bait cups that obviously still have worms in them, had I thought ahead of time, I would have planned to do this experiment a little bit before we had to leave, but I didn't. So there go the worms. If they go down right there, they'll find watermelon. So what I'm going to do with these bait cups after I get these worms rehomed is I am going to just leave the bait cups empty in the corner of the bin, and the worms will clean out every last scrap from the bait cups, and I hope the worms will vacate them, and when I come home they won't have eaten the bait cups, but they will have vacated them, and I can just take them out and use them for another experiment at another time. So anyway, so just to wrap this up then, if you want to put microbes into your food, whether you process it up in a food processor or you leaving it as you know, carrot peels and whatnot, it does make it go faster. If you just take a moment, you do not need a lot of your vermicompost because You know, you would be amazed how many trillions of bacteria are in every single, you know, little pinch of the vermicompost. So don't worry about huge amounts. I think it's more important to diffuse the bacteria through the feeding. We'll speed it up, and that will turn your bins over faster. However, if you want, like I do right now, I want the worms to just stay happy for the next 2 weeks, no rush to have them finish, then just absolutely leave the castings, you know, out of the food area. I put new bedding on top. The bedding was not infused with, inoculated with castings. And so I'm hoping in 2 weeks to come back and still see some worms in that feeding zone. So that's it for my worm bin experiment on whether it's worthwhile to put some microbes into your feeding zone. I hope that helps you as you decide how quickly you want the worms to eat through your material. All right, everyone, take care. Bye for now.